Part 2. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 11. Judging from the seats in the hall, it is obvious that the priest has the highest status among this group of people. He said let go, and even the knight did not retort, and took a step back to the side with a sullen face. The restraint on Greet's body was immediately released. He staggered to his feet, nodded meaningfully to the priest, and ran towards the child on his feet. Humph! How rude! The knight snorted coldly. The priest interrupted him in a low voice, "Stop talking and look." Greet's run couldn't have been more timely. Still 2 or 3 steps away, the boy with the knife on his neck woke up as if from a dream, thrashing his limbs and crying loudly. Although he cried fiercely, he could not make any sound, which made the child more frightened, tears streaming down his face, his arms and legs twitching, and he was about to lose his breath again. Greet rushed in at this moment. He flung himself forward, pressing his whole body on top of the child, holding down the 2 calves with his weight. Then, he grabbed the child's arms with one hand, stroked his cheek with the other, and comforted him repeatedly. "Don't be afraid, you're okay, you'll be fine once you can breathe, don't be afraid, breathe with me, breathe, 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 breathe." The voice went from high to low, from rapid to slow, and was full of concern. The child was really soothed by him, opened his big round eyes, and started breathing following his voice. Inhale, exhale, inhale again, exhale again. Soon the twitching stopped. Although he was still crying pitifully because of the pain in his neck, his demeanor was much calmer. It is not mentioned in surgical textbooks and diagnosis and treatment guidelines. This trick was taught verbally and heart-to-heart by Gretel's teacher in his previous life, the old director of the emergency department. Tracheotomy without anesthesia. After the operation is completed, the patient must be calmed. Already suffocating due to lack of oxygen, a knife was suddenly cut on his neck. The patient struggled in fear and consumed oxygen faster. If you don't comfort her well, she will go into shock every minute. By the way, you also need to appease your family members and people around you, otherwise, if you put down the knife here, you will be beaten up by the brave people there, or even handcuffed by the police. Don't say it is unforeseen. Gretel's thoughts were flowing and she was filled with emotions. It wasn't that he forgot the teacher's instructions just now, or he was knocked out by the knight before he had time to do it. Finally, the knight was merciful and did not kill him on the spot, otherwise, he would probably have to travel through time again. Thinking of the knight, I heard the knight talking behind him. His voice was low, sounding like he was whispering to the priest next to him. "Can someone save someone by cutting their neck?" "I have never seen such treatment," the priest replied. Perhaps because of his spellcasting profession, the priest's voice was soothing and clear, which was quite different from the knight's deep voice. Even if it was the first day he met them, Gretel could immediately distinguish their voices. However, he is quite confident. Moreover, the child is indeed no longer holding his breath, and his neck was cut open, and he did not immediately bleed to death. That's for sure. I have become very familiar with the anatomy of the neck since I was in college. If cricothyroidotomy can actually cut the carotid artery and large blood vessels, I can just die. Gretel complained silently. After comforting the boy in his arms, he breathed a sigh of relief and straightened up. The priest had been watching with interest. Seeing him stop, he couldn't help but ask, "Is this good?" "Morning," Greet replied, panting slightly. He looked around and didn't see what he was looking for, so he knelt on the ground, raised his head, and shouted to the crowd watching. "Give me the tube. Hard. Clean. Quick. Did you hear that? Hard pipe. Clean one. Find it quickly." A rich sound interface. Greet glanced at it and saw that it was Uncle Edmund, the farmer who had brought them in earlier. The farmer was very prestigious on the farm. When he gave the order, 7 or 8 people ran away, apparently looking for something. Gretel was slightly relieved. He turned around and saw the peasant woman who had rushed in with her child huddled aside with tears on her face. She wanted to reach out to hug the child but didn't dare to. He breathed out and asked her softly, "When did the child start to feel uncomfortable?" "During dinner, then it became increasingly difficult, so I just. The onset time is about 1 hour." Gretel silently wrote down a medical history in his mind, and then asked, "What did you eat for dinner? What did you drink? Is there anything unusual?" "Black bread, beans, we all eat them together, every day, and everything was fine before." "So, have you come across anything rare? Where is it being painted nearby? What fruits have you picked? What flowers have you come across?" Greet patiently continued to ask. He was already used to searching for allergens, asking about everything from his diet to his surroundings, whether he had touched, or smelled anything strange, and whether he had done anything he did not normally do. Ask about everything no matter how small it is, and don't let go of any details. I remember once rescuing a patient with severe allergies. The cause of the allergy was finally found to be that when the patient was walking past a fruit stand, a gust of wind happened to blow over him. Allergy to peach hairs. The doctor was forced to become a celebrity detective. He spoke softly and asked carefully one by one. The peasant woman kept shaking her head with tears in her eyes. As Greet asked, he focused half his attention on the child and answered the priest's question. "What do you want the pipe for?" "Insert it into the trachea." "Where's the tube? Why isn't it here yet?" "I'm coming." A man rushed out of the kitchen. He opened his left hand outwards and waved it hard to signal the people around him to spread out and stay out of the way. His right hand held something high. He ran closer, panting, and stuffed it into Greet's hand. "Here comes the pipe. Let's see if it works. I can clean it easily." Gretel lowered his head. In the palm of the hand, a chicken leg bone lay quietly, with both ends cut off to reveal the hollow interior. Gretel glanced sideways at the bone. The marrow in the center of the leg bone was almost clean, and he could see the candle light coming from the other end. "Okay, let's make do." There is no sterile packaging, a polyvinyl chloride disposable endotracheal tube, not even a piece of bamboo. Bamboo probably doesn't grow on this land. There is a hollow chicken bone, let's use it first. Greet shrugged. Rubbing his thumb on the cut of the chicken leg bone, he frowned and handed the bone back. "The cut is too sharp. Smooth it out." This. Uncle Edmund was in trouble. A hand was gently and deftly stretched out beside him, but it was the priest who took the chicken bone from Gretel's palm and handed it to the knight. "Roman, please help me." The Roman knight's expression darkened again. Without saying a word, he stretched out his hand to take the chicken bone, rubbed the pad of his right thumb on the incision, turned it over, and rubbed it again. Bone fragments fell, and the sharp cuts made by the kitchen knife on both ends of the chicken leg bones became smooth visibly to the naked eye. Gretel opened his eyes wide and couldn't help but let out a soft wow. "Just rub it with your hands. The thumb replaces the whetstone. Just so gently. Are the knights in this world physically so strong?" Before he could close his open mouth, the priest had already handed back the ground chicken bones. While handing it over, he asked curiously, "Insert the trachea? How? Why do you want to insert it?" "Wow. It really went in. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right?" Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 12. Greet had been intubated not only 10,000 times but also 8,000 times in his previous life. When it comes to tracheal intubation, there are only 3 departments in the hospital that do a lot of work: the anesthesiology department, the otolaryngology department, and the emergency department, which has a bit of everything and is multi-purpose. Intubation is required for chronic surgery. You can ask an anesthesiologist to do it, or you can ask an otolaryngologist for help. Anyway, the otolaryngology department occupies the word throat. They are familiar with the anatomy of the throat and are good at tracheal intubation. Everyone just schedules the surgery, makes an assessment beforehand, and arrives on time and on time. If it's an emergency, there's nothing you can do. The patient is already suffocating, and the tube must be inserted. Is it possible to call for a consultation and wait for someone from the anesthesiology department or otolaryngology department to come down? No matter if you take the elevator or run up the stairs, the patient can die in just a few minutes. Therefore, when the hard-working emergency doctor encounters such a situation, he rolls up his sleeves and does it himself. The problem is that Gretel had various intubations inserted in his previous life. Some were inserted through the mouth, some were inserted through the nasal cavity, some were inserted after the trachea was incised, and some were inserted without incision, some were ordinary types, and some were reinforced with stainless steel silky ones, some with an extra suction tube. Only, I have never had anything like this in my hand. One root chicken bone head. The two ends were cut off and slightly smoothed. There were still pieces of spongy bone in the middle, and the disinfection status was suspicious. Greet said he really wouldn't want to use this thing to replace an endotracheal intubation if he could help it. But don't we have nothing on hand? As a substitute, chicken bones can only be said to be better than nothing. While operating, he had to explain to the priest painstakingly. After the cricothyroidotomy is completed, what is the cricothyroid membrane? This is the place where I cut. Not anywhere on the neck can be cut. It is safest to cut from here. After incision, a tube must be quickly inserted into the trachea to prevent cricoid cartilage from being compressed and damaged and causing laryngeal stenosis. What is cricoid cartilage? Why is it damaged and why is the larynx stenotic? I don't have time to explain to you now. A child's larynx is very thin, so the tube cannot be inserted too deep. If it is inserted over the head, it will be very troublesome. Nagging, nagging. If any of his students dared to ask these basic questions, they would be beaten to death. They don't even know how they learned in class. However, it was impossible for the priests from other worlds to understand this, and the situation was more powerful than others, so Greet had to devote half of his attention to trying to deal with the opponent. He explains with his mouth and operates with his hands. There were no shadowless lamps, no incandescent lamps, only dim candlelight and torches, and no one was there to help with mirrors to reflect the light. Edison knew how to use the mirror when he rescued his mother. Well, although it was later said that it was made up. Oh, then. Stop talking. It's starting. The priest jumped at his drink and pressed his lips tightly. Greet lowered his head, aligned the chicken bone with the cricothyroid membrane incision under the flickering light, held his hand steady, and pushed inwards. After a slight feeling of blockage, a familiar feeling of loss spread to his fingertips, indicating that the intubation tube in his hand, a chicken bone, had broken through the incision and entered the throat cavity. The subtle, whistle-like sound of airflow immediately passed through the chicken bones in the throat and reached Gretel's ears. The operation is complete. Next is, well, fixing. Oops. Oops. No tape. There is no tool that can glue the chicken bone and fix it to the patient's neck so that it cannot move. What do you have on hand that you can grab for emergencies? On the first day of traveling to another world, during the second emergency surgery, Gretel burst into tears again. Facts have proved that doctors' imagination and creativity are endless when it comes to treating diseases and saving lives. Gretel was embarrassed for less than a second as he faced the chicken bone stuck in his throat. He immediately made up his mind, grabbed the child's hand and stuffed it into the farmer's hand. "Uncle Edmund, hold him tight," he earnestly warned. As he spoke, he grabbed the farmer's other hand and put it on the child's shoulder. Don't let him move. He can't move at all. Especially the tube inserted in his neck, absolutely cannot move. The bearded farmer nodded hard and called on several other men to come forward and hold the boy down. The priest of the spring water goddess had been watching with bated breath. Only now did he dare to take a breath and hurriedly asked. So this is good. It's still early. Gretel smiled bitterly. He pointed at the child's throat and motioned to the priest to take a look. Look, the throat is still swollen. The child can't breathe normally yet. When the swelling subsides, when will we be out of danger? Is that so? The priest lay down and tried to see, even coaxing the child to open his mouth. Unfortunately, the light in the hall was really dim, and he couldn't see clearly even after looking at it for a long time. After struggling for a long time, he flicked his fingers. There was a soft pop sound, and a white light floated up and floated towards the child's mouth. Why? Gretel glanced at it and immediately became anxious. Don't treat him yet. He can't be treated casually like this. But, this is just a lighting technique. The priest shrank back when he yelled, feeling a little aggrieved. The Roman knight held his sword beside him and glared at Gretel. Gretel didn't pay attention to the knight's eyes. He leaned next to the priest and kept giving pointers. Look at the inside of his throat, the very bottom, it's all swollen, isn't it? There should have been a black hole inside, but now you can't see anything. In fact, the lower parts are also swollen, and I can't breathe in. I almost died just now. I'm so suffocated. Hey, you are the priest of the spring goddess. Can you control the water flow and reduce swelling? What is swelling? Let the water drain out of these swollen places, and don't block your throat there. This. The priest was stumped on the spot. He frowned and thought for a long time, then shook his head. There is a similar magical attack technique. It is a high-level one. It can drain all the water from the whole body at once. My level is still far away. To remove the water from such a small area, I don't know. I'll pray and see. Can you attract divine favor? Just do it. The young priest adjusted his posture, regardless of how much dust the silk robe would collect on the earthen platform. He knelt on his knees and clasped his hands on his chest. After muttering a long paragraph and another, he finally raised his head and sighed in defeat. No, the goddess didn't respond to me. What about you? Do you have any idea? Eyes full of expectancy were once again focused on Gretel. Gretel was silent. I originally wanted to skip the steps and directly use magic to get to the answer, but in the end, it still doesn't work. The limitations of divine magic are really too strong. If there is a ready-made answer, you can just copy it. If there is no ready-made answer, you don't even have a solution to the problem. Well, then leave it to me and let modern medicine handle it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 13. Since it is handled by modern medicine, it is natural to follow the ideas of modern medicine. Greet calmed down and looked at the child carefully again. What he had observed before was correct. The child's face was swollen, and there were wind masses on his face and hands, which was mainly due to allergies. He turned to the peasant woman who came in with her child and continued to ask. Didn't you eat any strange fruits? Didn't you pick any flowers? Where did the child go to play this afternoon? How can you play? Little Remy is very sensible. 2 years ago, he would have helped the family with work. Disrespect. Greet wiped away cold sweat. How the original person spent his childhood was not yet fully connected in his memory, so he couldn't remember it for a while. But in my previous life, I was definitely still a primary school student when I was 7 or 8 years old. Carrying a small school bag, I go to school every day, and I don't even have time to think about how to blow up the school. However, Greed still knew how naughty 7 or 8-year-old children could be. When I was in the emergency department, parents rushed in every day with their children injured, sick, and for various reasons that were unbelievable. It simply challenged the limits of human imagination. Sometimes adults don't think that their children's peers may not know. Are there any children working with him? Can you call him and ask? Greet asked patiently. Before the peasant woman could answer, Uncle Edmund, the farmer holding the child next to him, had already answered. Yes, yes. There are 2 or 3 of them. Why are you still standing there? Go and call. Immediately some people ran away. Greet frowned and continued to think hard, trying to figure out what else might be the cause of the disease. On the side, the priest, who had finished looking at the child's throat, came over boredly. Why do you ask these questions? Gretel. Check for allergens. Greet bit her tongue and almost stopped what she was saying. Allergy, this word was so common in the past life, even if you are not a doctor, you know what it is. But to say it in this strange world. Greet is 100% sure that the curious baby priest in front of him will definitely get to the bottom of it. When asked, how to explain. Hypersensitivity, also known as allergic reaction, refers to an abnormal adaptive immune response that causes physiological dysfunction or tissue and cell damage when the body is stimulated by certain antigens. It's very simple, very clear, just one sentence in the textbook. It would really kill someone to explain. Let alone another world, even if Greet had asked a non-medical professional to explain the word allergy in his previous life. If you put a complete set of 53 medical textbooks in front of him, he would be able to flip through the books for half an hour and then yell out, "Which book should I read if I'm allergic?" That's right, for half an hour, I didn't even understand which book was about allergies. Fortunately, Greet was the deputy director of the emergency department in his previous life, and he has rich experience in communicating with patients and family members. He tidied up his words and answered slowly. I ask these questions to see if the child has eaten, drank, or touched anything he can't stand. Poisoned. It's not poisoning. Brother, who used the detoxification technique just now? Isn't it you? After spending a long time talking and sweating all over, I finally explained the appearance of allergy. The child's playmates during the day were also called. There were 3 of them, the oldest was less than 10 years old, and the youngest looked to be only 4 or 5 years old. Gretel asked the question again in detail, and as expected he asked something different. It's salted fish. I saw Remy break off a piece of the salted fish hanging on the beam. You're talking nonsense. We, Remy, are the most well-behaved and never steal food. The peasant woman jumped up like a female animal guarding her cubs, baring her teeth and claws and making a sharp voice. Mothers screamed, children ran, and men shouted to stop. The hall became a mess, and the volume reached 120 decibels again. Gretel sweated. He shouted loudly amidst the noise in the hall. Stop arguing. Someone go get that salted fish. No matter how much he suspects that salted fish is to blame, in the field of modern medicine, no doctor dares to make a diagnosis without conducting tests. Gretel has a salted fish in his left hand and a bowl of water in his right hand. Look left, look right. What fish is this? Forgive him that in his previous life he only knew how to eat, never buy or cook. The cooked dishes are placed in front of you. You can also identify what kind of fish it is. A raw fish is placed in front of you. This. Can't do it, don't recognize it, say goodbye. Fortunately, if he doesn't recognize it, someone will. The priest of the spring goddess stuck out his head, studied it with great interest for a moment, and finally came to a conclusion. It's cod. Is that what you're causing trouble by eating? Just cod? Greet nodded secretly. People in such inland areas usually cannot eat sea fish. It is normal for them to be allergic if they occasionally eat it. He smiled and nodded to the priest. I guess the possibility is not small. However, we still need to verify it. How to verify? Let the child eat again. Gretel Khan. The throat is swollen like this. If you let him eat, he has to be able to swallow it. What should we do? No matter how you experiment, generations of doctors in previous generations have paved the way for those who come after you. The doctor didn't need to worry at all. He suspected it was an allergy and just sent him for a skin test. It costs tens of dollars to do a test. Put 2 needles in your arm and drop a drop of antigen, and the results will be available within half an hour. But now, to do a skin test, you must first have an antigen. Antigens that are sterile, have no obvious side effects, and whose protein content has been measured are displayed in large boxes in the laboratory. They seem to be readily available, but if there are no ready-made antigen products, they must be extracted from raw materials. Gretel was a clinical major in his previous life, not pharmacy. But he also heard his pharmacy classmates cry that they had to extract the fish by hand when doing the project. They had to cut the fish into pieces, grind it with liquid nitrogen, add acetone to remove fat, stir, let it stand, and put it in a centrifuge. After completing a set of procedures, it would take several days and nights, and I would be so busy that my hair and facial features were unkempt. It goes without saying how many drugs and instruments are needed in this process. In previous lives, various seemingly ordinary conditions were supported by the country's strong industrial strength. In this alien world, the only thing Gretel can be sure of is what he can currently do is only the first step in preparing the antigen. Cut the fish into small pieces and soak it in water. Gone. Then, jump directly to the last step of the skin test. Bring 2 needles here. And a bowl of water. On the child's left forearm and right forearm, put a drop each of clean water and water mixed with fish meat, then use 2 needles to pass through the droplets and prick the skin gently each time to pierce the skin without bleeding. Gretel pinched his wrist, silently counted 60 times, wiped the droplets of fluid on the child's arms, and then. What to do now? Wait. For the prick test in the skin test, the results of type I allergies, that is, seafood allergy, nut allergy, and paint allergy, are observed 20 to 30 minutes after antigen stimulation. The child is temporarily out of danger, and the next step of treatment has to wait for the test results. What can be done now? Just wait. Look left, look right, sit there, doing nothing. Gretel. No, I have to wait for half an hour. Is there no one to send me to eat? Thanks to Etya Mengbing for the 5,000 starting coins and 3 monthly passes. Thanks to Etyan Huaxi for the reward of 1,500 starting coins and a monthly pass. Thanks to Et for the 500 starting coins reward for a bowl of fish ball porridge. The contract for this book has been completed and the status has been changed. Have all the investors received the benefits? Please collect, recommend, invest, vote monthly, recommend, and book reviews. Every interaction you have can help me move up 1 spot on the new book list. Now I have climbed to 135th place on the total new book list and 18th place on the new light novel list. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 14. Chapter 14. No adrenaline? Then, you can only use your adrenal glands. 20 minutes is neither short nor long. Especially when there is someone asking questions about you, one question after another, and you still can't kick him away. It is really like a year. Greet stared at the child's throat with one eye and stared at the priest with the other, gesticulating and almost drying up his saliva. Finally, I heard someone shouting, "It's red, it's red." It's so red. When I probed, I found that the boy's left forearm was smooth and flat, with no problems at all. The right forearm, the spot where the fish meat dripped, was very red, with a bulge in the middle, and an obvious wind mass. There are also red lines of varying lengths on the outer circle of the blush. At a glance, they look like insect legs. Blushing with pseudopodia and wheals. That's right, it's an allergic reaction, and it's a very strong allergic reaction. Of course, the strong reaction may also be because the fish meat water he prepared was not diluted at all. Greet felt a little guilty, but on the surface he still looked confident. He clapped his hands together. It's confirmed. It's the cod that's causing the trouble. What's next? Next. Gretel was speechless. After a skin test, the cause of the child's illness has been determined to be acute laryngeal edema caused by allergies. He is very familiar with first aid methods and can give medical advice with his eyes closed. Even when the doctor's order was given here, the veteran emergency department nurse over there had already prepared the medicine. 0.1% epinephrine hydrochloride subcutaneous injection. 10 ml of normal saline, add 1 mg of epinephrine, add 10 mg of dexamethasone, gargle immediately with your mouth for 3 to 5 minutes. This is followed by 20-40 ml of normal saline, 1-2 mg of epinephrine, and 10 mg of dexamethasone for continuous atomization. But now, what does he have in his hand? Nothing. There was no epinephrine injection, no dexamethasone injection, and even the normal saline solution that he instructed the staff to prepare must have an inaccurate concentration, many impurities, and could not even be considered sterile. Fall. I can't live this day. Fortunately, Greet already had a plan for this problem. He pretended to think for a moment and turned to the farmer calmly. I saw mutton soup in the kitchen. Are the sheep's entrails still there? Yes, the farmer, Uncle Edmund, nodded vigorously. Gretel heaved a sigh of relief. If it wasn't there, he would have discussed with the people on the farm and asked them to kill the sheep on the spot. He stood up and turned to the kitchen. Give me the guts. After this rescue, Gretel has established a high prestige on the farm. When he asked, someone would naturally run errands. Soon, a basin of bloody internal organs was brought in and placed in front of Greet with a bang. Then, Greet squatted on the ground in front of everyone, stretched out his hands, and turned over in the tub without hesitation. The priest who had been following Gretel also squatted down curiously. After looking at it for a while, I couldn't figure it out, so I couldn't help but ask. What are you doing? Find a gut. Which one are you looking for? The priest craned his neck and came closer. The Roman knight, who had been following him with his sword, fulfilling his duty of protection, finally couldn't bear it any longer. He took a step forward, bowed and interjected. Sir, you have a noble status, don't. The priest waved his sleeve impatiently. He stretched his neck, looked left and right, and unexpectedly, he was stricken by a smell of blood mixed with blood and fell backwards. Thanks to the support of the Roman knight, he didn't fall down. Still not letting go of her curiosity, Susu asked, covering her nose. What are you looking for? Isn't it just the internal organs? Just put it down and let them find it? They do not know. Gretel didn't even raise his head. He searched intently and muttered, kidney, kidney, found. There is another one. Oh, what you're looking for are sheep kidneys. The priest's head poked over again. Gretel raised his palms covered with sheep blood and made a gesture to push. Don't make any noise. There was a cold snort from the upper left. The Roman knight's sword was unsheathed and blocked in front of Greet's hand. Gretel was startled by the cold light, and the priest's big head shrank back, muttering. If you don't tell me, I kindly asked you to let others find it, but you still don't appreciate it. Gretel ignored him and concentrated on rummaging in the tub. The anatomical structure of the sheep that has been slaughtered is completely destroyed. Finding one kidney does not mean that another one will be found. He turned it over for a while, and finally pulled out the 2 sheep kidneys. He breathed a sigh of relief, put the pottery bowl containing the kidneys on the table, and began to peel them off carefully. From the beginning, what Greet wanted was not a kidney, but an adrenal gland. Adrenaline constricts blood vessels, while dexamethasone fights inflammation and suppresses allergies. Dexamethasone is a chemical synthetic agent, so you don't need to think about it now, but adrenaline, you can still think about it at least. With this thing, at least the laryngeal edema can be eliminated and the child can breathe normally. As for the chicken bone stuck in the airway, it can naturally be removed quickly. Theoretically, epinephrine is a protein hormone and cannot be taken orally because it will be hydrolyzed by pepsin. However, history is not without examples of oral epinephrine. Greet remembered that he had read such a record in his previous life. In the fall of 1893, George Oliver, the British doctor who invented the sphygmomanometer, discovered that the sphygmomanometer could detect the contraction of the radial artery in subjects after they swallowed a substance extracted from the adrenal glands of goats. In later generations, this experiment was regarded as the earliest significant evidence that adrenal gland extract can increase blood pressure. However, in Greet's view at this moment, it means something more important. Epinephrine, or adrenaline extract taken orally, does work. Of course, the child cannot swallow now. But Gretel has another hope. In the epinephrine family, neither epinephrine nor norepinephrine can be taken sublingually, but isoproterenol can be taken sublingually. So, adrenal gland extract, to be precise, the adrenal glands are crushed and mixed with water, maybe it has some effect, right? Gretel was so nervous that he didn't even have time to speak. Under the dim light, he carefully peeled off the outer capsule of the sheep kidney. Cutting, pulling apart, blunt separation, the rough iron scissors flickered gently in his hands, almost showing the dexterity of surgical scissors. The adrenal gland is a small one, located close to the top of the kidneys, and is wrapped in the renal fascia together with the kidneys. Human adrenal glands only weigh 5 to 7 grams, and goat adrenal glands are not much different. He had to be very careful to remove the adrenal gland completely without breaking it at all. I don't know how many active ingredients are in the 2 adrenal glands, and I don't know how much can be absorbed through the tongue. He, better be careful and try not to waste. Gretel was concentrating, and the movements of his hands were cautious and gentle. The aura exuded at work unknowingly infected everyone. Even the fussy priest stopped talking, lying on the table and looking at it without saying a word. The knight coughed beside him and tried to say something, but he blocked it with a wave of his hand. It wasn't until Greet completely peeled off the 2 adrenal glands, chopped and ground them in a clean empty bowl, and added water for the child to rinse his mouth that the priest let out a big breath and jumped up to ask, "Is this okay? Is it okay? Let's wait and see." Gretel stared at the boy's neck unblinkingly, always on guard against the chicken bones falling off. Fortunately, the child gargled for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, the chicken bones were still fine, but the edema in the throat gradually disappeared, and the sound of air rushing through the vocal cords became more and more obvious. Wow! It works. It really works. Yes, it's really useful. Gretel secretly wiped away the cold sweat, pulled out the chicken bones, and smiled tiredly at the priest. Next, please take action and heal his wounds. No problem. Look at me. The priest rushed forward eagerly. A child's condition, after going back and forth all night, he was finally able to put it to use, and the treatment technique was particularly clean and neat. After healing the wound, he straightened his robes, held his head high, and extended his right hand to greet. "Hello, young healer. In order to write about adrenal extract, I spent 20 minutes looking up various goats in the UK, the weight of goats. Romney sheep, adult sheep weigh 80 kilograms for rams and 41 kilograms for ewes. Lincoln sheep, adult rams weigh 73-93 kilograms, adult ewes weigh 55-70 kilograms. Nankai sheep weigh 80-88 kilograms for rams and 60-88 kilograms for ewes, etc. Thanks to everyone for the tips. This book has already reached the 85th place on the new book list, the 12th place on the light novel list, and is on the first page of the light novel secondary page. I added 40 favorites in one day yesterday. Thanks to @origami and gart for the 1,500 starting coins and a monthly pass. Thanks to @heyhahafan, @binksyurui, @yakunhan for the 500 starting coins reward. Thanks to @mengpo for the 100 starting coins reward for buying soup instead of selling medicine. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 15. Hello, young healer. The priest smiled and extended his hand. Greet raised his head slightly to look at the other person, and saw that the priest was about 24 or 5 years old, with a pair of blue eyes, which really looked like the clear springs of the spring goddess. Light blue silk robe, dark blue brocade belt, with 3 daffodils embroidered with white silk thread. According to the information in the original owner's memory, it should be the symbol of a third-level priest. The smile on his face was gentle and warm, and when facing Gretel, who was wearing a coarse linen waistcoat and with blood on his clothes, his expression was not strange at all. I am Noah Donald, servant of the fountain goddess. Nice to meet you. Greet stretched out his hand and shook it back. When he reached halfway, he found that his hand was still stained with blood. He was so embarrassed that he hurriedly retracted it. Priest Donald didn't take it seriously. He smiled and watched Gretel wash and dry his hands, then stretched out his hand again and shook his hand. Hello, I'm Gretel, Gretel Nordmark. Nice to meet you. As soon as he held his hands, Greet felt that the other person's hand was smooth and delicate, with only a few small calluses on the place where he held the pen. On the contrary, his original hand was hard and rough. Priest Donald seemed to feel something as well. He lowered his eyes slightly, then immediately raised them and continued to smile. I misunderstood you just now. I'm really sorry. And Raymond Knight, please apologize too. Gretel followed his gaze. The knight standing next to him remained motionless with a straight face. In the center of his breastplate, a rose entwined with thorns shone brightly. The hand that took off the iron glove held the sword, with several round sapphires arranged in a straight line in the center of the scabbard. He is wearing plate armor, there is an emblem on the breastplate, and it is different from the emblem of the temple, there are also gems on the scabbard. Even the temple knights cannot all be equipped with such good equipment. They should still be nobles in their families. Maybe, the level is higher than that of Priest Donald, or at least the combat level is higher than that of priest, such as a 4th level knight or something. No wonder he was so arrogant. When the priest asked him to apologize, he ignored him. Gretel's expression remained unchanged. Priest Donald's smile remained the same, he raised his voice slightly and shouted again. Raymond Knight. Being called out for the second time, the cavaliers could no longer ignore it. Lehman Knight's face was still calm, but he had already taken a step forward and nodded slightly to Gretel. Feel sorry. It's okay. What I did before was indeed easily misunderstood. Gretel smiled. He was already lucky, Gretel thought. The knight had enough strength in his hand that he didn't break his ribs, nor did he kill him on the spot. It is said that a colleague who was relatively unlucky in the past was performing tracheotomy resuscitation on a choking patient outside. People who did not know the truth called the police and was handcuffed by the police in public. Lehman Knight's attitude is really not good, but Priest Donald doesn't care either. Seeing the two of them talking, he turned around leisurely and raised his hand to the main table. Hello, Mr. Nordmark. Can I invite you to dinner? The treatment just now was very pleasant. I have many things I want to discuss with you, he said and turned his eyes. There had been such a big fuss before, and Gretel's teammates, including the little freckled priest John, and Captain Cullen, who had just been able to stand up on crutches, all crowded out to watch the fun. Priest Donald saw the young priest at a glance. With the same polite smile as before, he reached out to him. And this priest from the God of War temple, please come too, okay. The little pastor's face was stunned. He lowered his head and squeezed out, standing in front of Priest Donald, but he didn't know what to say. Priest Donald simply dragged him over and placed his hands on the main table. Greet was on the left, and the young priest John was on the right. They all sat down beside him. Relatively speaking, the Roman knight seat fell behind several healers. The farmer's wife and several peasant women were busy carrying plates and serving food. The tableware in front of the priest was brought by himself, including silver plates, silver wine glasses, and silver salt shakers set with gems. Greet and John naturally did not have such good conditions. Each of them had a pottery bowl of mutton soup and a basket of black bread in front of them. That's all. The only special treat is that you can actually see the meaty bones in the mutton soup. Greet didn't feel embarrassed at all and just ate. He was not embarrassed. After being stunned for a moment, Priest Donald actually recovered. With a smile, he asked someone to find 2 silver wine glasses and poured a glass of wine for each of them. The color is bright red and the smell is strong. Even if Greet never drank alcohol in his previous life, he can tell at a glance that it is good wine. Very good. Although the carriage, silk robe, silver bowl, and silver plate have not appeared yet, has the wine already arrived? Gretel wanted to snicker, but tried to hold it back. The Roman knight he was begging for couldn't bear it any longer. The priest he escorted first ignored his status and mingled with lowly people, and then forced himself to apologize. Now, he simply arranged for those untouchables to sit in front of him. 1 and 2, over and over again, which one is intolerable? He slapped the table and stood up suddenly. Sir, you have a noble status, how can you sit with these untouchables? There was a sudden start in the hall. Gretel was startled, and little John, who was sitting opposite him, put down the bread and his face slowly turned red. However, Priest Donald was stunned for a moment and then acted as usual. When he opened his mouth to retort, his tone was still as gentle as before. Don't say that. We are all healers and servants of God. What kind of healer is he? Roman knight's tone became even more excited. He simply stood up from the table and looked down at Gretel. He has never used a single healing spell until now. Moreover, I have never seen him as a priest apprentice in the city. Gretel opened his mouth to defend, but suddenly he didn't know what to say. As a healer, he knows in his heart that medical skills are real, healing skills fall out of thin air, divine revelations, etc. are all his own boasts. It's okay now, people have questioned it. And the original owner did remember that any priest does not appear out of thin air, but must go through a long period of study and accumulate enough knowledge and piety. In fact, it was too late for him to defend himself. The Roman knight took a step forward, his armor clanking, and he pulled out half of his sword with a clang, and the light shined directly into Greet's eyes. Say. Which god are you a servant of? He is the divine inspiration of the god of nature. Under the earth platform, beside the long table, several voices spoke at the same time. Gretel's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and glanced at the soldiers in the team, wishing he could have stuffed their words back on the spot. But it was too late. The Roman knight glanced down and sneered. A divinely inspired person? A divinely inspired person who doesn't know how to heal? A divinely inspired person who can't even heal his own companions. Before he finished speaking, he drew his sword loudly and pointed at Captain Cullen, who was leaning on his teammates and leaning on crutches. Prove your divine grace. Otherwise, you are blasphemy. Thank you for the reward of 500 starting coins. Thanks to book friend 2019071709143613 for the reward of 100 starting coins. The new book is still waiting on the homepage of the Light Novel channel. Today, it has added 40 favorites in one day. I am very happy. But there are only 59 investments. Asking for collection, asking for investment, asking for book reviews, asking for recommendation votes, asking for monthly votes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 16. Greet was instantly horrified. He has seen medical troubles countless times, from those who quarreled unreasonably for 4 hours, to those who carried wreaths and burned paper money in the emergency room, from those who hit people with their 4 poles, to those who directly drew a knife and stabbed people. Oh, finally that, he had only seen the scene where the security guards had finished cleaning up. But I have never felt so close to death. Blasphemy. Inquisition. The rack. On the first day after time travel, I had just escaped a crisis and was about to be burned to death again. Greet was covered in cold sweat and wanted to run away on the spot. However, looking at the cold sword tip in the Roman knight's hand and Captain Cullen's pale face, a surge of anger suddenly rose, making him forget all his fears. If something happens, come to me. What does it mean to draw a sword against my patient? Gretel suddenly stood up. The heart was beating fiercely in the chest, and the blood flow was rushing beside the eardrum. Before he could speak, beside him, Priest Donald frowned and shouted, "Roman! Put your sword away." When the priest of his own family opened his mouth, the Roman knight would not give him face. He snorted coldly and slowly sheathed his sword, still looking unyielding. Opposite Gretel, the young priest John also stood up, put his hand on the table and leaned forward, speaking indignantly. Gretel knows how to heal. In the name of the god of war, I saw it with my own eyes today. You said you didn't know him. How could you gentlemen in the city know a servant of the god of nature? Gretel. Isn't it, the church of god of nature is so poor? Several more memories came to mind. Greet shuddered and finally remembered why he thought the god of nature had no temple. Indeed, no, this church does not have temples like the god of war and the goddess of spring. They usually just find a hill, make a circle with stones on the top, and worship the gods inside. If there is no stone circle, just find an oak tree, and everyone stands under the oak tree and prays. Priests of the fountain goddess wore silk robes and rode in and out of carriages. The temple of the god of war is located behind the city guards' barracks. The high-ranking priests inside are all brightly armored, holding a shield in one hand and a warhammer in the other. They are running among the ranks of warriors and look more like warriors than warriors. The servants of the god of nature wear dusty burlap robes and carry an oak staff with buds in their hands as they walk through the streets. Walk from the slums to the field ridge, and then walk from the field ridge into the woods. In one word, poor. Even the elders are not much better. Greet remembered who had gossiped with him. When the city lord's palace convened high-level spellcasters for discussion, the elders of the god of nature order were wearing linen robes, carrying oak staffs, and walking on 2 legs. No wonder his teammates were not surprised at all when he claimed that he received divine inspiration from the god of nature, but instead looked a little disappointed. Which parent wouldn't be disappointed if they knew that their child had entered a new workplace that was extremely poor and would not get much salary increase if he was promoted? Just like in the previous life, when his mother knew that he had applied for the emergency department, she was distressed and reluctant to object. Greet fell into memories. His heart was sour and soft, until an angry shout woke him up. You saw him casting healing spells, and you also saw the god of nature giving him divine enlightenment. Do you think so? Aren't you afraid of blasphemy? Gretel was startled by his roar. The Roman knight was half a head taller than him, with a tough face and short dark brown hair that stood up one by one. He was particularly intimidating when he shouted angrily. Gretel subconsciously shrank back, but before he could refute, Little John on the other side pushed forward. Then you said it's not the case. The young priest responded with confidence. Although one is a powerful knight and the other is just a priest's apprentice, the knights of the temple of the goddess of spring have no control over the priest of the god of war. There is no need to offend people for no reason. When it was time to defend his companions, Little John started a quarrel, and he did so confidently. Gretel has displayed so many unheard of skills, but you are still not sure that this is inspired by God. Are you sure that the great God of nature did not give him inspiration? Or, do you doubt the grace of the God of nature? High and low snickers immediately broke out. The young men on the farm were laughing and joking, the older farmers looked away and had fun, and Greet's teammates all grinned openly. It is different from the temple of the god of war that always protects everyone, and it is also different from the god of nature order who dress simply and often help each family with their cattle, look after their dogs, and teach them how to farm. The temple of the fountain goddess is filled with a group of gentlemen from the city who put on a lot of airs and don't do much. Everyone really doesn't like them. The Roman knight looked gloomy. Even Priest Donald looked a little confused. A knight, a priest apprentice from another temple, it's okay to quarrel with each other, but when it reaches the point of accusing each other of blasphemy, it cannot be ignored. Priest Donald coughed lowly and stood up calmly, with a noble and elegant manner, and looked around with a smile. The laughter in the hall slowly quieted down. Priest Donald turned to Greet and leaned forward slightly. Mr. Nordmark, to be honest, I am also very interested in your healing skills. It just so happens that your companion is also injured. He simply left his seat, pulled Gretel with him, and walked to Captain Cullen. I believe you must want to cure him. I wonder if you can cast a healing spell for us to observe. This. Greet hesitated. The young priest opposite shouted again. He has already used it today. How can he use it again so late? It doesn't matter if you can't cast spells tonight. Priest Donald smiled and didn't feel dissatisfied at all. It will be the same if you cast spells tomorrow. Then you must ask me to see. The two men were bickering vaguely. Greet turned a deaf ear, looked blank, and thought hard. Healing, healing. How did I get released? By the way, I was thinking at that time, if possible, I hope Uncle Karen's injury will heal quickly. No movement. Think again. Still no movement. Gretel adjusted his breathing and concentrated. Recall the relationship between the original owner and Uncle Karen, fully mobilize his emotions, and then silently recite each word in his heart. If possible, I hope Uncle Karen's injury will heal quickly. Still no movement. I'm really not good at this kind of metaphysical stuff. Gretel deeply reflected on himself and decided to return to rationality. Don't worry, he said to himself, let's analyze it. How many prerequisites may there be for releasing the healing technique? Goals, methods, motivation. 1 goal, strong desire. This is probably satisfied, but not released, indicating that it is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. 2nd, methods, understanding the spell model. When he released the healing spell for the first time, he had no spell model in his mind. Therefore, this is probably not a necessary condition, at least within the scope of the lowest level healing spell, it is not a necessary condition. 3. Motivation. If the power source of cars is gasoline, and the power source of magic is magic, then the power source of magic is probably faith, right? What is my belief? The Almighty God of nature. Finished praying silently. There was no movement. The God of nature really ignored me. God's revelation and all that, it was indeed me who blew it. As witness to Apollo, the gods of medicine, Asclepius, and all the gods of heaven and earth, I solemnly swear. There was no movement. In the dimly lit hall, only the torches on the wall crackled and burned, as if in mockery. Greet had a slight sweat on his forehead. Why is there no movement? Why can't the healing technique be released? Is it true that, as those Westerners say, the Chinese have no faith? Impossible. Chinese people have faith. I have faith. Come. Think again. What is my belief? Is it the motherland? The motherland is already far away in another time and space, and can never go back, and it can no longer be the motivation for his struggle. Is it Marxism-Leninism? He did not join the party back then, and his beliefs were not so pure. Is it ancestors or history? Greet also doesn't feel that ancestors and history are the driving force for him to move forward. So, what exactly is it? If I have faith, if I really have faith. So, it should be to treat illnesses and save lives. Save one life after another and treat one patient after another. One day shift after another, one after another night shift. Every time I was exhausted, when I heard the sound of the 120 ambulance, I cheered up and rushed forward. Sometimes heal, often help, always comfort. That is all the love and sincerity accumulated since entering the door of medicine, 7 years of continuous bachelor's and master's degrees, and more than 10 years of clinical work. Unconsciously, Greet raised his right fist and put it to his ear. He stared straight ahead, as if there was a bright red flag waving fiercely in the void in front of him. Health depends on life, life depends on it. The familiar oath rolled over the tip of my tongue word by word. Every syllable is heavy as 1,000 stones. Clean, abundant white light fell silently. At that moment, Gretel burst into tears. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Lan 2020. Chapter 17. Wow, it's a healing technique. The healing technique is really released. Little Gretel, you are great. There was a low commotion in the hall. Children aged 5, 6, 7, or 8, young adults, farmers and women all rushed in one by one. Gretel's 3 comrades, the spearman Raymond, the archer Tong, and the shield warrior Vala, had to hold hands and form a half-circle to prevent the spectators from crowding into their captain. Little Pastor John's face was full of excitement, and the freckles on his face were shining one by one. In contrast, the Roman knight's expression turned even more gloomy. Divine favor can be boasted, but divine magic cannot be faked. If there are real healing arts coming out of his hands, then the young man wearing a burlap waistcoat in front of him must at least have the blessing of the gods. Priests and priests are at least nominally equal, as Priest Donald said before, we are all servants of God, especially if they belong to different gods. No one can control anyone else. It is even more impossible for the temple knights to control the priests. What a pity that rude pariah boy can no longer cause trouble for him. He slowly retracted his hand holding the sword. Greet, who had his back turned to him, didn't notice anything. He was only immersed in his own thoughts. Hippocratic Oath. From ancient Greece to today, for nearly 2,500 years, generations after generations, tens of millions or even tens of millions of doctors have believed in and followed it. Health depends on it, and life depends on it. Since 1991, Chinese medical students, one after another, have recited this oath and entered the door of medicine. From then on, treating illnesses and rescuing people was our bounden duty. When encountering a major disaster, we would wear white armor and march forward fearlessly like a warrior. The power of faith accumulated year after year is so powerful. If it is possible, if a trickle of it falls on me, it will be enough for me to gain a foothold in this strange world. Thank you to Hippocrates, thank you to the senior teachers, thank you to the doctors who have been fighting in the past, present and even in the future. Gretel's thoughts were wandering. The next moment, he forced himself to come back to his senses and focus on the injured. The healing skills you finally released must be used on the edge, and must not be wasted. Abdominal wound sterilization and anti-inflammation. Achieve the effect of antibiotic flushing. Avoid postoperative infection. The rectus abdominis heals, the omentum heals, the peritoneum and superficial fascia heal. If you still have some energy left, let the wounds in other places on your body grow as much as possible. So, how do I make this healing technique work well and do what I want it to do? Greet had no idea. If he is a full-time priest, or even a priest apprentice, during the learning process, a mentor will tell him the method from the beginning. How to guide with the mind, what are the key points that need to be paid attention to, not only teaching but also observing. I have watched it countless times before I release the first healing technique. The problem is that Gretel is a complete novice when it comes to healing. He claims to be inspired by the god of nature. There's nothing you can do about it, just give it a try. Greet started to think about it. He tried his best to recall everything he had seen during the operation and his understanding of human anatomy from years of clinical experience. Then, outline it carefully in your mind bit by bit. The divine light flows through the abdomen. Wherever he went, Staphylococcus aureus, Escherichia coli, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, all kinds of germs were eliminated one after another. Greet even made up pictures of these bacteria in his mind. Under the irradiation of white light, platelets gather in large numbers in large and small injuries, blood coagulates, and the wound is sealed. Just like when the healing potion was poured on, there were dark red rectus abdominis muscles, light white rectus abdominis sheaths, loose omentum, torn mesentery, and abdominal wounds that he had stitched or had not had time to stitch. Layer by layer, each growing rapidly. Granulation hyperplasia, blood vessel growth, epithelial cell climbing, and finally, the once injured tissue becomes intact again. Gretel didn't know how useful this kind of brainstorming was. He just closed his eyes and concentrated on thinking. Use solid knowledge and the ability to draw from imagination to describe everything that will happen or should happen in the abdominal cavity. Fortunately, every surgeon is a painter, or at least a soul painter. In daily clinical work, he often draws anatomical diagrams to explain to patients. It was not difficult for Gretel to picture all this in his mind. He was concentrating on thinking, and in the eyes of others, he was trying to guide the healing technique. The hall fell silent unconsciously. The soldiers and farmers all stopped whispering and even breathed softly. There were only a few children who were ignorant and fearless, laughing and playing. But he was soon hugged by the peasant woman's rough hands, and she covered her mouth with force. Everything was quiet. Gretel could only hear the crackling of the torch, and the heavy breathing that was deliberately suppressed from side to side. In the silence, a long voice suddenly sounded. Puff. This sound is really loud, long, and distinctive. In the hall, the soldiers surrounding Captain Karen were stunned for a moment, then burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha, Captain farted. Captain actually farted. The soldiers were laughing and laughing. Amid laughter, Gretel opened his eyes and jumped up excitedly. Just like when he performed the first appendicitis surgery as a resident physician and heard the patient's first fart. Exhausted. He clenched his hands into fists, raised them high, and waved vigorously toward the sky. The operation was successful. Recovering well. His idea, let's call it just an idea, seems to work. Uncle Karen, your intestines have grown. Captain Cullen was a little stunned. It wasn't until Gretel said it for the second time that he woke up from a dream and still couldn't believe it. Okay. All right. Is it ready now? At least you're starting to work. If you pass gas, it means your intestines have resumed peristalsis. Uncle Karen, You can eat. Very good. Captain Cullen was excited, the soldiers were excited, and Captain Cullen's former comrade, the farmer Uncle Edmund, was even more excited than them. As soon as Greet announced that he could eat, he immediately turned around and greeted. Boys! Bring the food quickly. Good wine, good food, big chunks of mutton, all here. Con, say less. Greet jumped up in a hurry to stop him. No. He can only drink some milk. At most, gruel. He can't eat anything else. What? Didn't you say it's already grown? The newly grown area cannot withstand the torment. There were sounds of greetings, obstructions, explanations, and it was a chaotic mess. Amid the commotion, the Roman knight crossed his arms and looked at Gretel coldly, his eyes cold. Health depends on it, and life depends on it. Tribute to all medical workers. Thanks to Etienne Huixi for rewarding the protagonist with 200 starting coins, this book created the first character card, which is the protagonist. Did you see it? Please check with the protagonist often. If there is a reward, you can tip it to the protagonist. It's the same, but as the star value increases, you can save a bit of publicity. I feel like I can stay on the light novel channel homepage for another day. Happy face. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 18. After successfully releasing the healing spell, Greet returned to the dining table and had lunch with the priest, feeling particularly confident. He and the priest chatted while eating, and took care of the boy for an hour to ensure that the allergic symptoms did not recur before going to bed peacefully. Before going to bed, I warned the child repeatedly that if the child felt any other discomfort, he must be woken up immediately. Perhaps because he was a healer, or perhaps because he was grateful for saving the child, the farmer, Uncle Edmund, did not let him and his comrades crowd into the big bunk, but arranged a separate room for him. Fine linen sheets and soft quilt, Gretel lay down in it and sighed comfortably. The first day of time travel has passed. From today on, I will live alone in this strange world. All I can rely on is my head full of scientific knowledge, the healing techniques I just learned to release, and... He touched his chest. Around the neck, there is a pendant tied with a waxed fine linen rope. In the memory of the original body, it has never left her body since she was a child. Translucent, leaf-shaped light green pendant. Neither gold nor jade, nor wood, nor stone. I don't know what it is, forget it, just wear it. Gretel muttered softly. As soon as he closed his eyes, he fell into darkness without even taking half a second. Gretel had a full sleep. When he first arrived in another world, he walked an unknown number of miles in one breath and went through 2 emergency rescues. Greet slept very soundly. As soon as I touched the pillow, I slept soundly until dawn, without waking up at all. The only thing that interferes with the quality of sleep is tossing and turning in dreams and writing papers all the time. The patient, male, 37 years old, was treated for trauma. The diagnosis was a 3rd-degree liver rupture, and 1 intestinal rupture, with a length of 5 cm. Intestinal repair surgery was performed without anesthesia, and healing potions and techniques were used to recover and restore the intestines. The patient developed flatus 6 hours after bowel surgery. Discussion: after intestinal surgery, the patient's intestinal peristalsis is slow to recover due to anesthesia and surgical shock, which generally takes 48 to 72 hours. In this case, it only took 6 hours for the patient to regain bowel movement, which was a significantly shortened time. It can be considered that the use of therapeutic techniques for healing after surgery has a significant effect on restoring intestinal function. It is recommended to carry out further clinical research based on this case. An evil thesis. Gretel got up sleepily and slapped himself on the head, making a crisp sound. I have traveled through time, and I no longer need to write papers to get promoted. Please spare me. Because of this nightmare, which was not a nightmare, Greet felt a little dazed when he got up to wash up. He put on his clothes sleepily, finished breakfast, and was just about to set off with his comrades when he received a piece of news. They were recruited by the temple guards to participate in the subsequent search operation. Us. Greet was at a loss. The young Pastor John beside him became anxious when he heard this. Gretel, you can't go. That knight hated you so much yesterday, this recruitment must be for you. You go, he doesn't know how to deal with you yet. Ah, will it? Gretel scratched his head. That priest is quite reasonable, and he has a good impression of me. But we are city guards. We still have to patrol. But that knight is the nephew of the city lord. Captain Cullen smiled bitterly, full of helplessness. The temple of the fountain goddess is a temple of nobles. Most of the priests and knights inside are from noble families. They recruit city guards at will, just to say hello. Patrol missions and so on, they said they would certify it for us after we go back. Little Gretel, forget it. But Uncle Karen, your injury is not healed yet. I'll go find them. Little Gretel. Ignoring the captain's plea, Gretel turned and rushed into the hall. The Roman knight stopped at the door of the hall, patiently listened to his request, and smiled. You are a healer, so of course you have the privilege not to participate. As for Captain Karen, isn't his injury healed? Gretel lowered his gaze slightly. The Roman knight's rhetoric seemed to pick him out and gave him ample reason not to participate in the action. Of course he doesn't have to go, but if he doesn't go, what will happen to his teammates? The evil intentions of the Roman knights are obvious. A small team of city guards, alone outside, did not dare to resist when called upon. If they don't go, the knights' anger and malice will obviously be poured out on them. The search mission will encounter all kinds of dangers. In the past, they may have used their own lives to serve as cannon fodder in front of the temple guards. Not to mention that everyone is a comrade, nor to mention that Captain Cullen has always taken care of the original body. As a doctor, he cannot abandon his companions and run away when they may be in danger. How to do? He stopped arguing, bowed his head slightly, bowed, turned and left. After going around a few times, he got into the row house opposite the barn and grabbed a temple guard. Excuse me, where is the priest? Can you inform me? The priest is still praying in the morning. The temple guard looked at him with very strange eyes. The eyes were contemptuous and a little suspicious, as if to say, don't you need to pray in the morning? Gretel. I seem to have seen somewhere that priests pray to God early every morning to restore the healing skills of the day. By the way, when I just got up and washed my face, the little Freckles also muttered to the sun, and said, what is he doing? That's it. When I woke up this morning, I was only focused on complaining about the paper, and I completely forgot about praying. Besides, even if I pray, who can I pray to? God of nature? He could not recall any of the names, teachings, or prayers of the God of nature. I am indeed a fake divine enlightener. Gretel is sad. Even so, giving up wasn't Gretel's style. He calmed down, turned to find the farmer, Uncle Edmund, and asked him to send someone to deliver a message to the city immediately. Then find the Roman knight again and continue to argue with him. Greet begged again and again, and argued with reason. Finally, he simply went out of his way and issued a threat. Then let me go for Uncle Karen. Anyway, I am a healer and have privileges. If you don't agree, I won't go. Okay. It's a deal. There was a snap with both palms slapping together. While high-fiving, Greet's left hand hanging by his side calmly made a fist. This guy really has bad intentions. Be careful. Putting on his backpack and water bag, Gretel set out on the journey again. About to set off, the young pastor rushed out with his luggage and stood beside him without saying anything. Gretel, I'm going with you. What are you going to do? If you don't want to send me home, of course I will go with you. Little John winked at him. The smile is both firm and cunning, and the freckles on his face are shining brightly, flying one by one. Don't even think about getting rid of me. Gretel had no choice but to reach out and shake his hand. Although he was recruited into the search team, Gretel was at a loss as to what he was looking for. He followed a large group of people through mountains and rivers, climbed over 3 mountain tops, and waded through 2 creeks. Finally, he camped in an abandoned castle at night. When he was half asleep, he was exploded by a scream. A skeleton! Clang, 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 a sharp sound of a sword being unsheathed. Although this ancient castle is far away in the mountains, it is not small in scale. It has a main castle, a hall, a watchtower, and a group of rooms. Unfortunately, most of it collapsed. Fortunately, the hall is basically intact, and the roofs of several group rooms are still intact. The only remaining ones are the 2 towers in the southeast corner and northeast corner, which look like they can be lived in. The temple guards occupied the most complete hall of the main castle. Priest Donald and Roman Knight did not live with them. Instead, they cleaned out 2 rooms upstairs in the hall and lived next to each other. The team's horses were settled in the group house. Greet's team didn't want to crowd with them. The 5 of them discussed and simply set up camp in the southeast tower. At this time, the tower in the northeast corner was filled with shouts, footsteps, and the sound of swords hitting bones. Today's reference book, Medical Statistics. Thanks to @Kanji's Iofan for the 600 starting coin reward. Thanks to @Bookfriend 201907170914366136 for the reward of 200 starting coins. Thanks to @Origami and Gart for the 100 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 19. Knock out 2 skeleton soldiers and use magic to destroy a magic mark. Before Greet could figure out the current situation, he had already been dragged into the northeast tower and into the basement. There is a secret cave in the basement. Gretel went down the spiral staircase and saw 3 piles of skeletons and 2 piles of unknown objects that looked like zombies. After turning half a circle downward and entering the hall, a sharp sound of wind suddenly came down from above. Careful! Someone screamed from behind. Greet subconsciously dodged to the right, and the man behind him rushed up, hugged him and threw him to the ground, rolling twice in circles. Just as he stopped, there was a muffled sound above his head, and another black shadow pressed down. Ouch! Pain! Wally, be careful. The world is spinning. Greet shook his head and finally integrated the information just now. When he first entered the hall, an enemy appeared above his head and dived towards him from top to bottom. Because he appeared from above, he didn't react at first. It was the archer Tang An who threw him away. The shield warrior Vala raised his shield to block it, but failed to block it. He fell on him with his shield. There were shouts and cries of pain. In the midst of the noise, Priest Donald's angry voice was particularly clear. Roman. No. The Roman knight raised his voice in response, raised his sword, and rushed back from the depths of the hall. The speed was so fast that it almost left an after-image. If Gretel didn't know it was a person, he would have thought it was a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Gretel rolled and crawled aside. He huddled behind his shield and saw the knight wielding his sword and fighting an ugly winged guy. The blade of the sword struck his paw, making sparks fly. What the hell is this? Vala, the shield warrior standing in front of him, murmured in a low voice. Gretel rubbed his eyes, then rubbed his eyes again, finally matching the monster in front of him with the one in the game, and took a breath. Good guy, this is a big thing. That guy with a lizard face, claws like hooks, and a pair of bat wings was exactly the same as the gargoyle in his memory. Observing the battlefield situation carefully, Priest Donald was across the hall, protected by a small group of soldiers. The soldiers in the outer circle were busy killing mobs. Obviously, the previous battle had advanced deep into the hall. As for how the gargoyle came to the entrance, and why the Roman knight rushed from that direction, Gretel decided that form was stronger than people, so he would keep accounts for the time being. The knight's fighting ability was indeed very strong. With his sword flying, he fought evenly with the gargoyle. At the other end of the hall, the temple guards rushed this way, with two large shields separated to the left and right. Two spear hands were hiding behind the shields and approaching step by step, about to crush the gargoyle in the middle. This guy is going to die. Little Freckles poked his head out from behind Gretel and laughed. Greed pushed his head back smoothly. Don't be careless, hide. Before he finished speaking, the gargoyle opened its sharp teeth and let out an extremely high-pitched, extremely unpleasant scream. The sound was extremely sharp, like the sound of fingernails scraping glass amplified 100 times, or like a file being filed directly against the eardrum. Gretel reflexively hugged his head with a look of pain on his face. Why are you shouting so loudly? You are a gargoyle, not a banshee. As soon as the screams rang out, the warriors who were approaching with large shields and spears stopped in their steps and looked painful. The gargoyle seized this gap, spread its wings as far as possible on its back, and jumped into the air. Watch out! Alert! It's going to run away. There were shouts in the hall. Not only did the temple warriors raise their swords and knives, but the soldiers of Gretel's team also invariably raised their alarm. Shield warrior Vala bowed slightly and raised his shield in front of Gretel. The spearman Raymond's steps were slightly wrong, and he held the spear in both hands and pointed upward. Archer Tang An held his sword tightly and stood sideways on Gretel's left side, as if he was ready to block the gargoyle's attack for him at any time. Gretel, on the other hand, grabbed the little Freckle on his back with one hand, tried to stand up on his toes, and stared at the monster from behind the shield. The gargoyle jumped to its highest point and began to flap its wings. Before it could change its direction, a bright white light suddenly shot out from the other end of the hall and hit it hard. Although it is just a white light, it is like substance when it is emitted. The gargoyle was beaten up in the air, white smoke was rising from its body, and the place where it was hit by the light beam was immediately scorched black. Seizing this opportunity, the Roman knight jumped up and slashed with his sword. Greed turned his head sharply. He looked along the path of the white light. At the other end of the hall, Priest Donald stood tall among the warriors, his blonde hair flying. Under the firelight, it was as brilliant as a halo. The cleric of the spring goddess looked attentive, holding her hands in front of her, palms and thumbs forming a triangle. And that sharp beam of light shot out of the void from the center of the triangle. Is this an attack magic? It turns out that the attack spells that the third-level priests in this world can unleash are already so powerful. Gretel was secretly shocked. Not far away, the Roman knight had chopped the gargoyle to the ground, raised his sword and removed the two wings from its back. The warriors swarmed forward, falling with spears and swords, and soon chopped the gargoyle into pieces. The Roman knight retracted his sword, turned around and walked towards the priest. On the way, his eyes flitted across Gretel's face, either intentionally or unintentionally. Greet shuddered for some reason, and just as he was about to leave, Priest Donald had already turned to him, smiling and waving to him. Gretel reluctantly walked toward them slowly. When I reached the end of the hall, I heard a temple guard reporting to the priest. "Sir, look, there is another door here." Before he finished speaking, a black light suddenly passed in front of his eyes. Gretel slumped to the left. Compared to being knocked down just now, the speed this time was much faster. He was 100% sure that he was dragged by someone, maybe he was dragged as a human shield. The force dragging him did not help him. Gretel lost his balance and fell directly to the ground. Before I could get up, I heard a scream beside me, heartbreaking. Ah! It's Roman Knight? Gretel's hair stood on end. Although he suspected that the knight was harmful to him, Gretel had to admit that he was the strongest among the group. Now the Roman knight is screaming like this, that opponent. Greet propped himself up on his elbows and reluctantly raised his head to look. To his surprise, the powerful enemy attacking the Roman knight was not a human, but a beautiful big cat. The whole body is pure black, the four claws are white, and the chest and belly are also pure white, as if wearing a white scarf. The big cat flew around the Roman knight. The knight roared again and again, but the sword in his hand kept cutting into the air. On the contrary, every time the big cat pounced and flashed its paws, blood would inevitably splash out on the knight. Greet could clearly see that every attack from the big cat landed on every joint of the Roman knight. Wrists, ankles, shoulders, elbows and knees. After a few rounds, the Roman knight fell to the ground, bleeding from many places on his body and unable to get up. The big cat jumped up. The movement was so fast that it was difficult to distinguish with the naked eye. All he saw was a black light leaping up in the hall, stepping over the heads of several people in a row, and rushing straight towards the priest. Priest Donald's face turned pale. He clasped his hands together and murmured a prayer, as if to protect himself with divine magic. However, at this moment, a mantra was heard at the door of the hall. The last syllable suddenly rose high, and a circle of black light burst out like a ring. The priest was beaten stiffly. The big cat seized the opportunity, threw him down, bit his throat, and growled. When the black light passed by, Greet, who had just climbed halfway up, felt his whole body go cold and fell down again. 20 or 30 soldiers in the hall, including the young priest John, fell into a large area like wheat. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 20. A black cat seriously injured the strongest Roman knight in the team. A flash of black light knocked down the entire audience. Gretel's heart couldn't stop sinking. The newcomer is extremely powerful in combat. It can be said that it will not take much effort to kill them all. What's even more terrifying is the black light, black cat, skeleton soldiers, zombies, gargoyles. It sounds like a painting style. What if the owner of this place really comes back and sees them smashing up the house, killing the skeleton soldiers, and demolishing the gargoyles who were looking after the house? The consequences could not be more beautiful. Greet squirmed as lightly as possible, trying to shrink into a corner and act like I didn't do it and these things have nothing to do with me. Before I moved twice, I felt a cold feeling on my back, as if a bucket of ice water had been poured down on my head. Gretel raised his eyes and looked around. The faces of the soldiers lying on the ground around him were filled with horror. Clatter! 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 Someone approaches from behind. The footsteps were a bit strange, like hard knocks on the ground, or like little claws scratching on the ground. Greet stiffened her back, lowered her head, and slowly turned her face to look out of the corner of her eye. What caught his eye was a long black robe that almost touched the floor. The black robe was made of an unknown material. It was thick and drapey, and did not reflect light at all. All the light seemed to be sucked into the robe. If a fashion designer in the previous life saw such a piece of material, he would have wanted it at all costs. Greet trembled and looked up again. The black robe was fluttering, and no outline of the human body could be seen. It looked like the person wearing the clothes was just a skeleton, and he was holding a long bone staff in his hand. Before seeing the face, the Roman knight rolling on the ground screamed. "The necromancer, you are the necromancer." The man in black robe paused. The long black robe fluttered and fell silently. The Roman knight screamed a few times, raised an arm and pointed at the black-robed mage, his arm trembling. In Gretel's eyes, The knight's wrist was twisted unnaturally, and the shape of his fingers was also a bit strange. The thumb could not be straightened, maybe the extensor tendon was injured. Greet guessed silently, watching the Roman knight straighten his index finger tremblingly, and pointed it straight at the necromancer's face. "You, a foreign necromancer, dare to harm the priest of the spring goddess. Aren't you afraid of the temple's attack?" "I'm so sorry. I just entered the city this afternoon and went to the mage tower in the city to report," the necromancer answered confidently. As he spoke, he took a step forward, and his black robe stirred violently, like the angry roaring waves when a storm came. "It's you. Enter my mage tower and smash my gargoyles. If I hadn't come back early, even my laboratory would have been demolished. The temple? If the temple dares not to apologize and compensate, I will unite with the Magic Council tomorrow. Come and demolish the temple too. Don't even think about it," the Roman knight roared. He propped himself up on the ground, and then again, but he couldn't get up no matter what. With a sudden move, he simply bowed his head on the ground and bumped into it like a prawn. Dash. Bang. A golden light flashed. The Roman knight was knocked out on the spot and smashed against the wall. The wall shook with a rumble, and the Lord Knight slid down softly, rolled twice, and made no movement again. The footsteps continued to move forward, and the necromancer pointed at the priest with his bone staff and sneered. "How do you say?" "Oh, hey, I'm running towards the priest. Every wrong has its owner, every debt has its owner. When you go out and turn left, you will find the temple of the spring goddess. I'm just a little guy, and I was recruited for compulsory recruitment. I haven't even touched these skeletons and zombies. The necromancer seems to be a reasonable person, so he probably won't settle a score with me, right?" Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as he felt safe again, he stretched his head and began to think about the Roman knights again. Fracture. He was probably unconscious, and considering the collision just now, he was probably concussed. I don't know if there was any internal bleeding. If you can't get up from the ground, depending on where the cat is scratching, you may have ruptured tendons in your wrists and ankles. The big cat scratched her so many times that the trauma was definitely infected, and she might have had tetanus. Since it is a domestic pet, let's rule out rabies first. Greet observed attentively, one by one, silently recording the cases in his mind. After recording, he turned his eyes away and looked in the direction of the necromancer. What a guy. Walking next to the necromancer step by step, there is a brilliant golden light and thousands of auspicious auras. What a golden skeleton. And it's still alive. There is no cartilage between the joints and no ligaments connecting them. But, I can move and walk. Just now, I defeated Roman knight. Gretel's eyes were bright, and his attention was immediately attracted. Skeleton. A skeleton that can move. The skeleton in their school of life sciences still cannot be moved. It has to be placed in a glass cabinet with a railing on the outside made of velvet rope. It must look like a teacher's treasure. There are some that can be touched, and they are all in the Liangshi building, anatomy building, but they are all piece by piece. If there is no complete, full-body skeleton that can be touched, then there are only plastic products. But this is true. Real. Compared to the skeleton soldier who was hammered into pieces before he could even see it clearly, this golden skeleton was much more delicate and dexterous. Greet looked carefully and saw that the bones were not made of metal. The fracture marks on the tibia of the left leg and the ridge groove on the pelvis were clearly visible. They looked like normal human bones, with a brilliant golden light coming from inside. Want to take a closer look? Want to touch? Want to get started? Gretel was so absorbed in watching that he even forgot about the threat of the necromancer. Unknowingly, he had sat up from the ground and leaned forward, wishing he could lean up to observe. How does the skeleton move? There are no joints, no ligaments, the pieces are loose and still move. The necromancer drove away the Raymond Knight, and reached a compensation agreement with Priest Donald through half blackmail and half threat. When he turned around, he saw a young man sitting up among the soldiers lying on the ground. He raised his head and stared at the golden skeleton he was protecting, as if a man was about to crawl into the skeleton. "Necromancer, what are you looking at? There's something wrong with this skeleton." Greet answered smoothly without looking back. After answering, he jumped in surprise, turned his head, and looked at the sound. "Who was talking to me just now?" "Nothing was seen." "No, it's not that I didn't see anything. I saw a pitch black cloth, a black robe, a thin face." The necromancer was quite tall, especially in the eyes of Gretel, who was sitting on the ground and looking up, as if he had a pillar holding his head. Not only is he tall, but he is also thin. Wrapped in a black robe, he looks like a hemp pole. Of course, when a person is so thin, his face is not much better. His cheeks are pressed tightly against his cheekbones, and his cheeks are sunken. It looked like it had just a few more layers of skin than the golden skeleton next to him. Greet was slightly startled, but not too scared. For a necromancer, it's normal to be a little thinner. Even a skeleton with 2 points of phosphorus fire burning in its eyes would fit in with the image of a lich he remembered. The necromancer, on the other hand, was impatient. He took a step forward and asked repeatedly, "What's wrong with this skeleton? The head and body are not the same person." "Not alone? How could you tell?" "Hey, I don't feel sleepy anymore if you ask this." Gretel pushed himself on the ground and stood up. When he stood up, he was a little shaken. The golden skeleton was considerate and reached out to give him a hand. The skull belongs to a man, and the pelvis belongs to a woman. These are obviously two different families. Thanks to Etienne Huixi for the 300 starting coins. Today it is ranked 82nd on the new book list and 12th on the light novel list. Although it fell off the first page of the light novel, my collection is still growing well. Be happy. Continue to ask for collections, recommendations, and investment. The investment is still far away from 100. I am a little nervous and rub my hands together.